Hello, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Talk Gnosis. As always, I'm your host, Deacon John, joined as always by my co-host, Jason Memo. Jason, how are you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well as well. So we're here to talk about film, psychoanalysis, and Gnosticism with the Y Theory podcast. Hello, Y Theorians.
Hey, guys.
Hello.
Thanks for having us.
We're really excited to have Todd McGowan and Ryan Engley here on the show. I guess I should actually start by, we're big fans of said podcast. The simple descriptor that you have for it is why theory brings continental philosophy and psychoanalytic theory together to examine cultural phenomena. Could you guys tell us a little bit more, how the podcast started, why you do it for no money, and what you're trying to do with the podcast?
Yeah, so since it was originally my idea, and it was in 2017, and I had no idea how to do a podcast, so I couldn't. And Ryan had been my graduate student, and we had a really good relationship. And I thought, well, Ryan, we get along really well, and he knows how to do podcasts, and that would be fun to do it with him. So he's the only person I thought of contacting. It wasn't like he was my second choice. And I just thought, what I thought was there, and I didn't, I mean, maybe this is true, but that there are these now, I'm sure there are many. I just didn't think there were many podcasts devoted to German idealism, psychoanalysis, Lacan. And so I thought it'd be helpful for people to hear some discussion of that and then applied to cultural phenomena. But I mean, we try to divide between purely theoretical podcasts that still have examples from culture, and then more like the last one we did was top 10 films of the 21st century. So we try at least keep in mind that when we're thinking about an episode. We do requests sometimes from people for sure, but we also try to keep some kind of balance. Like we feel like we're tipping a little too much over to movies and television, so we're trying to tip back into theory and then we also do these little series, like we talk about Lacan seminars, we talk about works by Freud. We've gone through all of Hegel's phenomenology. We started to go through Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. That seemed to have got interrupted. So those are the kind of things.
My version of those initial days is, so I'm happy to know that I was Todd's first choice because he was my fifth choice, because I was doing 3 other podcasts. That was part of the reason. That was part of the reason why he asked me, because for me, it was like when George Harrison had just done Cloud 9 and then started the Traveling Wilburys. That was kind of more like what it was like for me. But now Todd's my one and only. So that's how that works. Part of it's kind of funny when people ask us this question. It's a generous question, especially at the start of a podcast. But we started not thinking anyone would listen, and it didn't really matter, which is part of why. I think the spirit of that is also part of why we've never wanted to make money off of it. Also, that I've never personally listened to a podcast that I really liked that I thought got better once ads and monetization was introduced. So it's just not really something that I want to be a part of the thing that we do. And in those early days, one of the goals of the show was that there was a big movement in the academy that was called the digital humanities, which is all but it somewhat disappeared from at least the juice behind it due, I think, to the pandemic, when everybody had to submit to relentless digitality all the time. So that just it burned everybody out about it. And so this was I remember one of the conversations Todd and I had about it was just yeah, well, you could say it's a digital humanities thing. That's kind of hot. You could say that in when you apply for jobs. And I thought, okay, yeah, that's a good point. I could totally do that. and now our podcast has outlasted the fervor for the digital humanities, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, no, we like to, as Todd just said, just to say in different words, but we'd like to imagine the podcast as a string of different series, or at least that tends to be the way that I think about it, that we, drift from and return to and try to, sharpen or refine based on whatever the object is that we are talking about that week. That we've we just finished our 200th episode, and there's, I think sometime this month or next month, we might pass 4 million lifetime listens. It's crazy.
Whoa.
Yeah. And so it's, we didn't think anybody would listen, and we would have done it even if the two of you were the only listeners, we would have just kept doing it, I think.
Okay, good to know. Well, good to know if you suddenly become incredibly unpopular.
Yeah, it's another way of me saying don't leave us, because that could happen, and we need at least you two. So thank you, John and Jason.
Yeah. Well, that's about how many listeners we have. So no, that's good. We have plenty. They love us. We love them. So I don't believe in doing bios. Look, I'm just going to Google and find Ryan and Todd's bio and regurgitate it. You can do that. But both of you have media studies, film, television studies backgrounds, right? And it's part of your teaching, part of your academic careers. And your podcast is not a movie or television podcast, but movies or television come up every episode in very specific ways, just about, right? And of course, you do specific episodes on films. Can you kind of talk about that background and bringing this into the mix of continental philosophy and psychoanalytic theory, and again, kind of what you're doing here? Why theory? Why movies? Why TV?
Well, I think for us, the theory comes even though you're right that we're trained in film, TV, literature, for us, one of the things that we found lacking in the academy, both of us, I think, was a real theoretical rigor, and of the kind of thinkers that we liked, like Freud, Lacan, Hegel, Kant, existentialism, Marxism to some extent. So we thought that's what we want to explore. And then I think, I wonder what Ryan would say about this, but my sense is that for us, we think film and television is important on its own, but we also think it's a great proving ground for theoretical ideas. One of the I taught a class on The Sopranos, and it was called The Sopranos and the Unconscious. Yep. And you can read this on is it called Rate My Professor? Is that what I think it's called? That? Yeah. You can read this on that. Someone says, this person, I wanted to learn about television. He didn't teach me anything about television, just about psychology, which he's not qualified to teach. And so he sucks. And fair enough. I mean, I thought and that's kind of true about our podcast, right? Like, I mean, we're what we're really focusing on, even when we do. Have we done an episode on The Sopranos? I think we have.
We did that episode on the bottle episode, and we talked about Pine Barrens, but not about the series as a whole.
But not about the series as a whole. But say we did this thing on Mad Men, I know. And we're more interested, I think, in the theoretical dimensions of the television series or the movie than about the thing itself. And so at the end of each episode, I don't know why we started doing this. It was a joke, really, to giving a lesson.
Yeah, someone liked it. It was from the listeners. Like Todd just mentioned it, like one of the early episodes, doing this lesson at the end, and then we didn't do it for 2 in a row, and he got a bunch of emails from people saying, "Why aren't you doing the lessons anymore?" And so then now we do it forever. Yeah,
right. Now we never miss one. I mean, it's a little embarrassing because someone sent a list and certain films are repeated 3 times. Okay,
some lessons are worth repeating.
Like that one. Yeah. So that became part of it, and that, like, again, that's a film that illustrates a theoretical point. It's not a film I mean, it's obviously we think they're good, but some films on there I don't think would make any of Ryan or my top 100. For instance, I think we recommended the film Cars, and while I think it's pretty good, I wouldn't put it in the top 100 films of all, or whatever. How many episodes we've done? 200. I wouldn't put it in the top 200 films of all time. So there's not necessarily greatness of the work is not necessarily the focus.
Yeah, right. We recommended Matrix Revolutions once for the same reason, which was that theoretically it embodied something. That was what we were talking about, not the fact that it's a very good movie, which it's not. So I would say, similar to what Todd said, depart slightly. I'll also drop a little bit of personal lore on about Todd and I. So Todd and I both are afflicted by the same thing. We both have what's called aphantasia, which means we don't have mental images. So Todd was born that way, hashtag born this way, and I had my images taken away from me, for lack of a better phrase, when I was in the car accident that I was in. You probably heard me talk about it before, which suffering a traumatic brain injury.
You mean because you talk about it during every episode? Is that why?
That's right. That's right. Yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
So that's why you've heard of it, because I keep talking about it. So for me, on just like a personal level, why media I think matters is because I can point to something and say, like, you saw it too, and I know that you saw it. And I also think that again, that's part of the reason, like on my side of things, I won't speak for Todd on this, but it's like, I think it's about how you think about the thing that you saw that is what matters. And that I is a profound lesson that I learned, particularly after the car accident, but going through graduate school. I will also say, part of what Todd mentioned about a lack of rigor in certain areas of the things that we talk about, I happen to think also that, like, there tends to be, especially with television, people either talk about it theoretically or they talk about the medium, and they don't do both. And I try to do both, and I find myself in small company as someone who tries to, like, extract something theoretical from the medium and then also the content which appears upon it. So that's what's in it for me on the show, and as a scholar, is like, I just think it's I find it very uninteresting that, we're going to find out who are the good people who made the things, and the good people who made the things that are good, those are the good things, and the bad people who made the things, well, those are the bad things. And the things that came from the good money, that's good, we like those things. Things that came from the bad money, that's a bad thing. Thing that came out at a good time, that's a good thing. The things that came out at a bad time, that's I just find it profoundly uninteresting. So there's a lot of evaluation, and there's a lot of, in academia, a lot of ways of inventing words and terms to justify trying to have a purity of evaluation, and I find that profoundly uninteresting, even if there may be some compelling moral claim for why one should do that, or to try to consume ethically. Obviously, I avow that that's like a good thing to try to do, but I think one of the things we come to all the time is that, like, something really great can come from something, like, really bad, and something really bad could come from something really great. It's not really an idea that's in culture. I'll give you a specific example. I don't know if anyone in this room has seen the 1968 Dino De Laurentiis produced film Barbarella, but it is okay. Yep. So just one of the reason why that film was made is it tells you in the first 5 minutes. The code, the Hollywood production code, it doesn't exist anymore. So you know what we can do? We can see Jane Fonda topless, and we can have her have sex, and we can film her doing that, and we can finally do that, and that's why we're making that movie. So out and out, the point of that film, from the people who produced it, is just very clear, is they wanted to make a very sexist film for ogling. That's why they wanted to do it. And even though they did that, here's this is the great psychoanalytic lesson. You can try to make a very sexist film, and you can succeed, but then you can do something like this, which is what Barbarella, Jane Fonda, does in that film, is she has to track down and stop the scientist named Durand, with a D, Durand, which is why the band is named that. And he's not the person who she thinks he is. He's actually the villain of the story, and he's going to try to kill her. And he puts her in this machine that he starts playing like a piano. And what happens in this machine that's a piano that he plays is it's going to kill her. It's going to overwhelm her with pleasure. And you start to realize, if you're paying attention to, like, the iconography and everything, is what he's put her in is a sex organ. That's what it's an organ that he's playing. Okay. And so she's in a sex organ, and he's playing it, and he's trying to kill her through sexual pleasure. But her body can take so much sexual pleasure that it destroys the machine itself and ends up catching Duran. So even in this very sexist film that was meant to, so you could ogle Jane Fonda, what it has at the end of it is, like, I almost can't think of a more feminist, from the perspective of,
yes,
like, a man's body. I don't think I've ever seen a man's body like that on film. I don't like, it hasn't worked that way. It's difficult to imagine, maybe like a straight man's body, I maybe only, but, like, that's something that, like, you might say, like, only like a woman character could do. And whenever we talk about, like, strong female characters or whatever, it's almost always like a woman is doing something that men typically do in movies. That makes a strong woman character. This is, sorry, John McClane is not doing that. It's not happening. It is only happening to Barbarella and Jane Fonda in this movie. So that's, in a nutshell, I think the kind of thing that we like to try to extract.
Oh my God.
There could be something radical come out of something that in many other ways is completely regressive and
Oh my God. Okay, I've got to jump in on this because there's so many, I think there's a quote from Philip K. Dick that something about the divine rising through the trash stratum. And that just speaks to, and I mean, never mind the qualification of what the heck is the divine, just what you talked about there, this emergent possibility coming out of something where the intentionality was so far from that point I love that. The thing that I also, we're 16 minutes in here and people might be wondering, so why are these guys on a show called Talk Gnosis? And I think one of the things that I'm really excited about to have you guys on about is I'm gonna make a claim here that you probably won't agree with, but I would say you guys are a Gnostic show, not in the sense of how Gnosticism is defined as a classical period that involves these texts, the demiurge, et cetera, but as a process of criticality around cultural texts that they were doing then that we are seeing, or that, I mean, arguably we've been seeing now, as though the same way we look at a Bible, but they were like the rewriting a gospel was the podcast of the early aughts of the early Roman period. And I think that, like, I often say that for me, Gnosticism is not about having a worldview that's specifically dualist and follows these particular things, but it's being critical of the texts that you're getting and addressing your questions to and through those texts, which is, I think, again, something that I like. That Barbarella thing is, like, that's an amazing example of, I think, the exact same process. And so I want to dig deeper into that. Like, I'd love to also ask, like, some tips to give our listeners, like our Gnostic listeners, about how they, like, ways they can ask questions that lead them to those processes. I know John's got some other stuff he wants to talk about too, but, like, that's a big thing that I've been thinking about the chance to have you guys on.
Well, I think that's if you define Gnosticism that way, then I'm not going to be balk at it being applied to me, but that wouldn't be the way I would have defined it. But I think one of the things that is implicit in what Ryan said, and I think I agree that Barbarella example is really good, and he should have probably saved it for our podcast.
Bring it up.
Yeah, but I think that the attention to the form of the thing, that's kind of what Ryan was saying about the way that there's so much attention to the content of, like, what's the engine that's producing the text, what's the content, what's in it, and not that much attention to the form. And I think that's one of the, and this, Jason, this really, what you said made me think of this, that we both have a great affection for the classical Hollywood period. And even though Ryan's example of Barbarella was immediately post the production code, we both feel like the production code had an incredible fecundity for creating great works of great films. And I think I just saw the Fantastic Four, which I unrecommend to I disrecommend that film as violently as I can. I thought it was just god awful, unwatchable. I also thought, if people know this guy, Lee Edelman, a friend of Ryan and mine, he wrote a book called No Future about how one of the ways that heterosexual ideology functions is that it ends the film with this baby, and the baby is the solution. And I thought, these people read his book, and then and he's critical of that, and then they're like, oh, this is a good idea. Let's make the baby into the savior of humanity. It's just terrible. But I thought was, and you think, and as you're watching, you're like, can't just the apparatus of the studio just make a better film than that? Even though if the director's an idiot, whatever, aren't there enough qualified people? And I think there was a time when that was true, that there was just a studio apparatus, and it was constricting, and you couldn't do a lot of things, you couldn't say a lot of things, you couldn't curse, you couldn't have too much violence, you couldn't have any sex, as Ryan just pointed out. But that apparatus and those restrictions created a certain kind of art. So I think that's one other thing that we try to think about, is the way that limitations, this is tied to the idea of form being important, that limitations can be productive. and that they're and seeing the way in which they are is really an important critical gesture.
Yeah,
I was.
I agree
Oh,
with
sorry. Go ahead. I
No,
was just
no,
going to say, I find that idea, and maybe it's something that you blow the minds of your students with, right? Because particularly when you're young, restriction is bad. You want. I just want to be utterly free, man. And I think about how much just in my personal life, I grew up in a small place where there wasn't much to do, right? So me and my friends started bands and did indie theater. If we had the internet or cable or literally anything to do, right? We might have hated it at the time, but there's a great fecundity due to these limitations and restrictions placed upon us. And of course, I find that we live in this bizarre world where in many ways we're told we're more free and we can see our avenues of freedom, particularly for expression, but in other ways we're sort of more oppressed and controlled than ever, right? And I don't think maybe there's something about having these clear boundaries instead of these invisible the occult boundaries are all around us. But yeah, that was just my rant. Please, Ryan.
Oh yeah, no, John, I quite agree. I think in some ways in the media landscape we're dealing with something today that is more repressive than the Hollywood production code, and the reason is because it's happening because it's not direct, because it's indirect, and it is a self-censoring on behalf of audiences, and it's a self-censoring on behalf of the people who make the movies, who are guessing at what audiences will like. So what ends up happening is that there's nothing objectionable to the executive, because these movies cost a lot of money to make, that ends up in the movie, which means there's not anything challenging. And then as audiences in general, and I this isn't, I try not to be, Statler and Waldorf commenting on the on the opera as though they're not there. So the whole reason why you can do this is because you're a part of the thing. So, but I do this too, where as an audience, I tend really to only like things that don't upset me. And I try to be conscious of that and challenge myself on that. But that's sort of like where we are, where they're on the audience side of things. I think that we self-censor the art that we take in, and we find all kinds of ways to watch the same things over and over, in different guises, or literally the same thing. And then I think that, we complain about, Hollywood only giving us the same things, but then in our own practices, we just tell them they have all the data. They know, people just want the same thing over and over again. So and then of course you can get the global political thing, which is that things have to play well in China, things have to play well here. We used U.S. military assets in this movie, so we can't say anything overtly bad about the military, et cetera, et cetera. So all of this, what it lacks is the kind of spirit that dominated the production code era, which is that okay, we have all these restrictions. Can we say something radical? There's despite it, all the time, I think people do skirt around the rule, but they just do it to continue to play by the rules. So you can't say suicide on TikTok. So people came up with the phrase unalive. But then that's not that's not pointing toward an undoing of the system. It's just trying to continue to play by the rules, and it lacks the kind of thing that Todd and I like to point out in particularly film noirs, where you have people who are not abiding by contemporary society's rules and they're trying to change them, and because of the production code, it means that they probably have to die by the end of the film, but nonetheless there will still be things that will get by the censors, and there'll still be some sort of subversive content. You can't show people having sex. So okay, and out of the past, right when two people embrace, a door blows open because there's a giant thunderstorm outside. And if you think about that iconographically, that it's a lot more lurid to have a door blow open and it is sopping wet outside to substitute for a sex scene than to show 3 seconds of people, more than 3 seconds of two people embracing. But that's what happened in the production code. There were these subversive ways to get around the rules, not people subverting the rules to continue to play by them, which is, I think, what is the thing that we do today, because ultimately I think there's a really large cynical belief amongst people that there's really no changing them anyway. So what's the point? So there's only a limited amount of value in a transgression, and it's just so that I can say something in a minor way and then move off of it.
There is also something there too. I'm thinking a bit about in comics how like many of the people now, and I mean in the Marvel movies, which is sort of downstream of a lot of that content and stories, is that many of the storytellers now are explicitly or implicitly themselves inside the nostalgia for the thing that they are now reproducing. Like, whereas like Jack Kirby, he wasn't a fan of Captain America. He came up with Captain America with Joe Simon, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's other things that led to that creation as well, like that, that there's like other cultural forces that brought that to being. But that now when somebody is trying to write a Captain America comic, you know, they are thinking about Chris Evans and they're thinking about like 60 or 70 years of comics and thinking more about that than the fact that this character was only ever created, if that makes sense, that there's no real history. And so I think there's something really interesting there too about like this, what you're saying there about content versus medium, that like this assumption that like people are like, oh, that's not Superman. Like this new Superman movie is being compared to Zack Snyder's Superman. Oh, that's not Superman. That's not what Superman would do. He's fictional. There's no him that can't do a thing, if that makes sense.
or that really is good. Yeah, Jason, I think it's really good. And I think that's why the Superman film was interesting and the Fantastic Four film wasn't, right? Because it was really, all of a sudden there were things that you didn't expect to see and that were against even our, not just the doxa of the Superman story, but also our the ideological doxa of the time, right? Like I think that to me, I usually go into superhero film thinking this is just going to repeat for something that I already know. But I thought there were a couple of occasions in Superman where that didn't happen. And I thought one of them was the decision to have he and Lois Lane be lovers. And then she really, you see, when she interrogates him as a journalist, you're like, well, his answers are not really that good. Like he really can't stand up to a real journalist. And that raised this, I think, really interesting question, because so many superhero movies are about doing the ethical thing and avoiding the political context. And I thought her point in the film, and I think this is the point of the film, is that every ethical act there's a political bearing to it. Like even he's just like, I was just stopping the war. I was just saving lives. And she's like, well, okay, but that's intervening in an international, like maybe it's going to do more damage. So I think that's a really like a real turn in that genre. And that's something that, in addition to the whole thing with the parents, which I thought was amazing, really. But I think that ability to turn to, and I think that's why if the genre has become a little stale, that's maybe a lot stale. That's why, because you can't add, like for the reason you're just saying, like there's certain pathway that's become hackneyed, and then that has to be followed, and then that's uninteresting, because I think what we're interested in is something that is disturbing to our usual ways of thinking, even though it's a tough thing, but on one hand we want to just have something that confirms what we already think, but on the other hand, I think what makes a thing interesting to people is that it doesn't do exactly what they think. This is why people say Empire Strikes Back is the best Star Wars film, right? Or I don't know if they maybe say Rogue One now. All of a sudden there are things that happen in that film that you don't expect when he says, Luke, I'm your father. I mean, I know some people are like, oh, I knew it all the time, because his name in German is basically Dark Father, right? But most people, I was watching, I was like, that has to be a lie. And same thing happened. And I think when you respond that way, that's really revelatory, because that happened to me in the Superman film. His parents, I'm like, and Ryan and I were just talking about this before we got on. I just said to myself, that's a lie. They've manipulated that. It can't be true. And but it was true. And so I think that's really, when you have that response in the cinema, that's a sign that something's interesting, especially when it's true. turns out that it wasn't a lie, that it was.
There's also something.
Sorry, Jason.
Oh,
No, I just wanted to
go ahead.
mention just a more prosaic point on Superman, that because we both liked it quite a bit. Failure has to mean something in a movie. This is why Empire is the best Star Wars film, and Rogue One as well, because there's a failure that is a success in that movie. I mean, that's why that film is very good.
Everyone
And
dies, right? Just
exactly.
not to give away the entire
Not to give away, yeah. But to begin the Superman film with him failing, and then he continues to fail. He fails in that interview with his girlfriend, and just in all kinds of other things. It's not something I can think of in this like since Iron Man era of the superhero film where like failure means something. Basically, we're like failure is usually the enemy, and then we're just supposed to celebrate success, but like success through like the most minimal challenge by these people who are like invincible and can't be hurt. But like in like Superman Begins, and it throws that out the window, where failure means something first, and that as a base on a very basic level license it to do everything else that it does, and it's and again that's why I think it's successful. And this is also, I'll just put this in here, is that like I think that people have a sense of this. Like, I mean, everybody. I don't think one has to go to graduate school or have a master's degree or whatever to apprehend this. Like, I think when you go to see Superman, you really like it. That I think these are the things that you like. You may describe them in different ways, but like this is what works for you. Is that like you saw him fail? It's the best. It's one of the best things that you could do to start a movie, just for anybody who wants to be a screenwriter. Have your main character fail, or have them be late to do the first thing in the movie for something. You get to do all kinds of showing, and you don't have to do any kind of telling, and it opens up the entire world. And like we gravitate toward these things, whether we describe them in the same ways or not. And that I think is like, for Todd and I mean, I think this is true for Freud as well, is that like this is where the theory is in the everyday objects, and that like you can, and I think people often do extract the theoretical lesson without knowing it. And so I think what we try to do, and especially trying to do in like this conversation, is that okay, then when you do know that lesson, so what? How does that help you? How does that open other things up? It can't just explain itself, because I think that makes it like a superhero succeeding in a movie where failure means nothing.
Exactly. Yeah, like the Marvel whichever phase it was essentially culminates in a vast story in which failure means nothing, because we fixed everything. Yeah. There's something there too. Honestly, John, we'll do a Pop Gnosis episode on Superman.
Perfect.
Maybe we'll also do one on the Fantastic Four, but it might not be as glowing. I haven't seen it yet, but if only because Jack Kirby came up with Galactus when Stan Lee told him that the Fantastic Four had to fight God. So I think there's an interesting
Gnostic point there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and comics had a code. Know this, I'm sure. The comics code that just ended 5 years ago, and there's no sense of that in these movies, which is why I think Todd and I reacted so strongly to the things that Superman did, because the film did, because it seemed to be reacting against an internal code that has been encrusted upon Superman. Like his parents were always doing a really good thing. Everybody always loves him. There's if people don't like him, it has to be a mistake. Or they don't, it can't be a philosophical disagreement that's played out seriously. And so I think that was good. One of the things that's good about that movie is anytime that you can, subvert the code that has coalesced, both whether it is actually tangible externally or something that is just kind of cropped up alongside it, I think is a good thing.
Something that's also kind of interesting here, and I want to try to use this to maybe bring it back into a more general thing, but is that so? One of the things about that movie is that not only like his story of how other people see him changes throughout the movie, but then also his story of himself is a thing that he then takes agency over. By the end of the movie, he decides who he thinks are his real parents, if that makes sense. He decides the story he wants to follow, compared to previous versions of this, where there was a real truth that he could go to, that his dad sent him to Earth because Earth is where he can do good. And if that makes sense, that there was a clear, how do I put it? A clear fact, an objective external fact of his meaning that can be applied to him is in those other Superman movies. Whereas in this one, his his external meaning is not something he can draw on from an external text, if that makes sense. He has to choose it. And I think that, again, kind of goes back to, I think, what's interesting about the work you guys do is that there is a sense of being aware of these texts and choosing that you don't have to accept the way the text is being presented to you. You don't have to accept the lessons of the content necessarily, you know?
Right. I think that's a really important point. And I think that one of the things that we're interested in is oftentimes the way in which the text doesn't accept itself, right?
Yeah.
The way that it's saying something against what Brian's Barbarella point before.
Mm.
And I think and I think this is really nicely captured in Superman because the message from his parents is garbled, right? And so
Mhm.
where does his agency lie? Well, it lies in how you interpret a garbled message. And I think every text that we encounter is basically a garbled message from our parents, right? And so, I mean, that's a kind of reductive Freudian thing, but I do think that that's true, and I really love that idea that the message from your parents is garbled because I think that metaphorically captures what it means to be a child, and I think then how you interpret that message is that is your freedom, right? And I think that really, I think it's a good. I haven't seen that put on in a film or a novel better or a television show better than I did. I mean, I don't mean to overpraise this film, but I think that's a really, really good theoretical point that,
Mhm.
okay, been made by certain psychoanalysts for sure, but I think it really, the film really brought that home. And I think that is a real lesson for how you interpret anything that because it's garbled, then you have an incredible freedom to interpret it in a way that would go against the intent of the original creator.
Ooh, creator. That's an interesting hook. John and I were bantering a little bit to like have some ideas of things we wanted to talk about with you guys. And John, you've got a joke set up that I think would also be good to talk about creators, counterculture stuff. Do you want to go with your joke here?
Sure, absolutely. So a Gnostic goes to a psychoanalyst, and the analyst asks, "Tell me about your relationship with your father." The Gnostic replies, "Which one? My earthly father who's trapped in the material illusion, the demiurge who created this prison realm, or the true unknowable father in the pleroma?" The analyst writes something down and says, "Let's start with whichever one that didn't pay for your health insurance."
It's pretty good.
Yeah, the people at home won't know that I used AI to edit in that laughter, so that's
That is 100% not true. That was honest, honest guffaws. Because I think a big thing about there too is that there's a rebelling against a text and like rebelling against dominant forms of text, and so I think there's also a thing to talk about the I guess the dialectic of either I'm just going and watching whatever Marvel movie and I'm just not, it's just in and out kind of thing. It's a thing to distract me from my day, or I hate Marvel movies because anything that everyone loves, I hate kind of thing, like a regressive countercultural response. And I think in some cases, that Gnostic joke is kind of a similar default response. You know what I mean? I now have this one lens I can use to apply to everything else. But yeah, so like, and that, I guess that commodification of counterculture is maybe a thing that I know that John would like to talk about, that I'm sort of
yeah,
setting
no,
up here.
That's it exactly, Jason. And it's not the best joke to illustrate my point, but when somebody discovers anybody who was my Facebook friend in 2011 when I first got heavily into Gnosticism, right? So when you have this hermeneutic lens, and particularly when it's like rebellious, you think of like a teenage goth or punk, or now adult goths and punks. But particularly when you've adopted the persona of the rebel, right? It's like, well, what are you rebelling against? Everything. And that was once a rarity, but now it is everybody, right? We're encouraged to be rebels. We're all individual rebels rebelling all the time. So I guess both Jason and I are asking, right? About if everybody is a rebel, we have this commodification of countercultural culture and how corporate capitalism consistently co-ops creative communities, converting an authentic anger into aesthetic accessories while manufacturing maverick mindsets for mass market consumption. I'm asking, like, how can we get out of this? Do you guys see a way through? Because if all rebellion has been sold back to us, if we're encouraged to be rebels, how can we rebel? Does any of this make any sense?
Mhm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Todd and his very good friend Paul Eisenstein wrote about this in a book called Rupture. And I believe, or you also enjoying what we don't have, actually. Maybe that's the book I'm remembering. I read them both at the same time, so I'm doing like the Zizek thing where he says Peter Sloterdijk had this thing to say about cynicism, but really it was something that Slavoj thought about while reading Peter Sloterdijk. Anyway, where like in the U.S. has such an outsized cultural impact on the rest of the world, and one of our chief exports free of tariffs right now that is this idea of being the rebel, even if you're doing something that is like deeply conservative and very status quo and very much part of like institutions and as regressive as it could possibly be, but like it's this position of rebellion that we put in all kinds of things like that. Like this is the nonsensical appeal of Trump and the MAGA followers, is that they like there's nothing like older or more popular than being horrible to marginalized groups of people, but they believe themselves to be rebels. Like they've got the real truth that they're working from because they do that thing. So I think that what it requires is to look at two terms that Todd and I have talked about before, that like you look at nostalgia and you look at cynicism, which I think are the opposite of each other. And what nostalgia tries to do is to sustain an originally satisfying encounter or relationship with something or someone or whatever. And cynicism attempts to sustain an originally dissatisfying relationship with someone or something or whatever. So these two often, this is what gets toxic about them, is that where one fails, the other one comes in to rescue. And that's a cycle that we are locked in at the level of like pop culture evaluations of superhero movies, and also in like politics and how we imagine civilization, like what we are doing as a species. So it's at the very small level of just like Marvel movies haven't been as good since phase 1 or whatever. Okay, that's an originally satisfying relationship that if you lapse into like, cynicism is not like a diagnosable category. It probably should be. But like if you fall into that as being a diagnosable thing, it means no matter what happens in any Marvel movie, you have to sustain that thing. Okay. Because that like phase 1 was the best and we're never going to get anything as good as phase 1. So, and you just reject anything else. And so then that's where, nostalgia and cynicism become dance partners that gets you nowhere. And so we do that at micro levels and we do that at macro levels. And in each of those positions, a nostalgic position and a cynical position, one can imagine that they're being a rebel against, whatever the new thing is coming out, or people are trying to organize against this thing or that thing, which is why, like, I not make too much about the one Superman movie, which we both like quite a bit. I love the idea that the punk rock thing is kindness, which is really how that movie ends. It's kind of beautiful, and I mean, punk rock is about being like, being subversive and anti-establishment. And if the establishment is telling you to either be nostalgic or cynical, I think kindness is the answer. In a radical way, in not a easy Hallmark greeting card kind of way, but in like a really, really hard way that could be transformative. So that would be how I would attack that.
There's a term, I don't know if you guys have heard of hope punk.
It's interesting. No.
Yeah, like this idea of rebellious optimism, like that, or radical optimism, not blind optimism, and not like, like rose-colored glasses optimism, but simply like we might as well make it better, you know?
Yeah.
And that feels, yeah, like that kindness is the new punk. Is a good friend of mine, a playwright, Natalie Meisner. She and I've worked on a couple of shows together that she's written, and I think in general, hope being this necessary ingredient is, I think, like kind of deeply embedded in that whole process. So yes, I think that's a great response, and it kind of also, like, I think, again, I want to make sure that our any Gnostic listeners who are more Gnostic than theoretical are kind of going like, okay, how does this work? How do I apply this? Is that I think, like, there is, I think, particularly with ancient religious texts, a desired, and I think Gnostic religious texts allow people to be both nostalgic for a religious framework and also get to be cynical of a mainstream religious framework, like that, oh, it's not the real God, it's a demiurge, and so now I can, but it's like it often just maps the same assumptions up one level, but it's still the same structure. Whereas like and it also often leads to those classic Gnostic perspectives can often lead to a world nihilism. This world doesn't mean anything because it's all just a fated, terrible reproduction by a flawed creator, et cetera, et cetera. But it's like, well, yeah, but we're here. So we might as well make it better, that there's the radical optimism, radical hope that could maybe be applied in a spiritual context as well. John's the deacon, I'm not, so he might have more thoughts about how to go there than I do. But yeah, I just like, I felt like I wanted to kind of see if I could make some linkages for any audience members that wanted to kind of get a few more Gnostic nuggets here.
I wanted to something that ties together a few things that we've been talking about, sort of that the way that both critical theory and Gnosticism explores texts from within, not on their own terms, but I would say particularly, Gnosticism is interesting because it's not on its own terms, but there's an exploration that is meta, that is narrative, right? So Gnosticism is a religion that's critical of religion within religion, right? So the texts become very meta, and they're a very interesting example of early meta texts. And obviously, there's some metacognition, meta thinking when it comes to critical theory, but this is something I should be a big fan of, but I've been very annoyed by what I call the Shrekification of all movies and media, right? Which is that there's been this huge shift towards mainstream media breaking the fourth wall. There's and you find it just in all sorts of examples, right? From children's films to very serious films. And I'm wondering what you guys, if you guys have noticed this, what you think about it, why do you think it is? Why it's become so prevalent? Are we stuck with it forever? Will we always, you know what I mean? Like, is this a trend, or has the wall been taken down? You know what I mean? Can we not go back to pre-beta entertainment?
I think we can probably go back, but I do think that the term that Ryan used is what explains that development. That it's this very cynical development, and I think it allows you to. And I think this concept from psychoanalysis is really, really important for understanding the world today, which is fetishistic disavowal. So that's what happens when they speak to you, right? That they say, okay, you know very well that this is just a movie, but now you have to disavow that this is just a movie and act like it's real, act like it's real life. So I think that's ensconcing us in this fetishistic disavowal, and which is, I think, tied to cynicism. I think Ryan would agree. And that I agree with you that that's a lamentable development. I don't think it was, this is just my view, I don't think it was ever, even when it's in a Jean-Luc Godard film, I don't think it was ever the radical kind of filmmaking. Because I think that what's interesting is the way in which, there's never a single moment like that in a David Lynch film or television. Because Lynch wants you to feel like he wants you to be so immersed in the thing that then you collide with something that is shattering. But if you're always holding back and winking and nodding at what's happening, then you're never going to have that shattering moment. And I think that's really, I think that's why one of the things that I find just unexcusable is the way in which if you go to the movies now, people are texting, they're doing other things. My son won't even watch a film at home with his friends because they're just on their phone the whole time, and it just ruins the film for him. And and I think that's a way, that's the same thing as this fourth wall breaking, right? It's a way to, how can I dilute the possible impact that this film might have on me? And I think that's so submitting. I think the first step to being a critical filmmaker is learning to submit to the demands of the medium and its form. Like you have to submit, like, what is this film asking me to do? I'm going to follow along. And then, okay, along the way, certain points at the end, for sure, you can be critical and you can say I was about Fantastic Four, but I was still submitting myself and saying, okay, is there something always, I think always you want to say, is there something interesting here? Because you never know if there have been films where it's going pretty badly, but then if it ends at the right time, it can be great. And I think it's true about television. I mean, someone said to me that I watch television series like I do films, which is why I count the ending too much. And that's maybe true, but I think it's really true about the television series too. Like if it ends at the right point, it can redeem a lot of sins that come up beforehand. I'm almost convinced that about film, I think this is true, that if you end a film at the right time, any film can be a great film. Like if you just know when, I mean, some of those films might be after 30 seconds, but right time, then it can be a real great film.
Listen, as a big fan of Three Stooges shorts, we should have more shorts. So, John, I think the lineage of the fourth wall, it actually, I think it starts with the end of Ferris Bueller, and then it's Saved by the Bell, and then it's Shrek. Oh. That's what I think is the trajectory. But I agree with what Todd is saying, and I think that like there's precious few fourth wall breaking pieces of media that use that as a way to increase the encounter and the trauma of that encounter with media. One thing that I will say that I think does a very good job at this would be the British series Fleabag. I think does a very good job of using the like, because you're so integrated into the show that when you're shut out, like you are in every other piece of media, that becomes traumatic. And so
what do you think about, I agree about Fleabag, even though I've only seen one episode, but what do you think about 2 or 3 things I know about her? Do
it's
it
pretty
twice,
good.
they do. Because that's the same, right? Like it's it breaks the fourth wall from the opening shot, and it's basically the narrator is talking to the spectator. But do you think that's successful? Because I think I love that film, but I wonder if it maybe doesn't suffer. This is a film by Jean-Luc Godard from 1968, whatever. I don't know.
It's a tricky balance.
Yeah, because that, sorry.
To kind of feed into that too. Like I just watched with my partner Hannah Gadsby's Nanette, and I don't know if you guys have seen that. And that is actually, I would say, an interesting example of like comedy is usually it's defined by the fetishistic disavowal process. Like I'm going to set up these things and then mock them, and her, through her monologue, like it, in a way, it is a comedy sketch, but it is also turns into essentially like a storytelling experience or a theatrical experience, of her decoding the comedy process and taking away the comfort of the format while doing the show, and that like it shifts away from like set up joke into I am no longer going to define my history as something I'm protecting myself from through comedy. Like there's it just seemed, again, I think it's a fine line to walk, and I don't know that this is that's the perfect example. But Ryan, I think the way you defined it there through Fleabag, I think gives me a similar sense.
Well, you have to be implicated. So what Hannah Gadsby does, what's brilliant in that special, is that she makes you laugh at the joke early in the special that she later gives you the context for, like she almost died. So she told you this joke of almost being beaten up at a train station because someone thought she was a man. But then, and so you laugh at that because it's like a gender misidentification thing. And she had a couple other of those jokes early. And then like 40 minutes later, actually the guy came back and realized, I'm protected by the law and I can kick the shit out of a lesbian if I want to. And he almost killed, like that's, so you laughed earlier when you didn't. So you are now implicated in the form, and that's the trick. Zach Morris, Ferris Bueller, go home. Like, you're not implicated in the form. You're just like you're watching it just kind of skate by you, and it is the film like equivalent of like what Todd was talking about with people you're just on your phone watching the thing, because there's a layer of protection between you and the thing. And this is where like the trigger warning thing is like really interesting, because there's a lot of kinds of conversations you can have about it, but this is the thing that I happen to like about the entire thing, is that it is an avowal that like a film actually is traumatizing, like that's, and which I think is true. And it's the wrong response is, look, it's a movie, they're actors, it's not real, it can't hurt you. Like, bullshit. It can hurt you far more than anything that happens in your own life. Now the issue is that, like, if you're only, to go all the way back to the beginning of our conversation here, is that like, if you're only watching things that just like comfort you in the same way, then like you're not really getting anything out of the art or the form as such, which, whatever, that's your choice. But like that I happen to think, like, Todd and I teach in, like, I'm in a media studies program, Todd teaches in film, and I think like if you're a student in that, like, you have to have an openness to being upset, and that is different from like just a person out in the world who, like, whatever. But like, if you want to study this, like, you have to have an openness to being upset. The other thing about triggers is that like everybody is triggered by something. If you don't think you're triggered by anything, you just haven't seen it yet, would be what I would say.
Yeah.
So
I lament anyone who feels that they've never been triggered.
Yeah,
because they're like a walking accident waiting to happen. But this does lead into something, John. And maybe this can also be a way for us to fade into what will probably be another future episode with you guys, because this has been great, is that there is something that's come up a few different times of like what made Superman, the new movie, so interesting was that it pushed against so much of what we've expected, compared to a media landscape that is so expected, that is often itself full of both nostalgia and cynicism in equal measure, but nothing fresh and interesting. And that there is something about that also, the submitting to the fact that something can change you, makes me think about that there's this kind of like rift space, like that at its best, that we can either, even if the movie didn't intend to have it, like Barbarella, that we as people who are submitting ourselves to experiences to allow them to engage with us, that trying to find that rift is maybe that most interesting place, compared to like holding yourself back, keeping yourself protected from it. Like, I'm thinking about how the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once made like as much money as a Marvel movie, but its budget was like, 10% of a Marvel movie.
Mhm.
But it was a movie that let itself go into so many rifts of expectation, if that makes sense. Yeah. So that's, I think, maybe like a way for us to kind of fade through here. And John, if there's other stuff you also want to bring in before we close, but like that might be like how offering to creators and studios, like, consider letting yourself create rifts, because that's actually probably where you're going to find the new thing that's going to blow people away and become a phenomenon, versus like a nostalgia that you're trying to market and treat like a stock price that you can keep high. But
I agree with you, Jason, but I don't think they're listening. I know most of the big Hollywood executives, they do tune in. But
exactly.
Listen, you might be surprised. But I think, Todd, if you want to follow up on this, because I think we probably would answer in a similar way, which is like, I think from a psychoanalytic perspective, what this amounts to is an attempt to foreclose the unconscious, both like for the viewer, for themselves, like possibly getting into something that consciously you might not agree with or like. And I think on the side of producers, like taking the gamble, the risk of like maybe stoking something in audiences that might make them a little bit uncomfortable. And I think it amounts to trying to control the thing that makes cinema so transfixing and intoxicating in the first place, which I don't think can be, when you try to account for it as though it is an economic good, you lose it you lose any chance of engaging a spectator in the way that you are engaged by films that do try to subvert your expectations or get you to the, again, last Superman example for me, but I don't know if you heard this, but James Gunn almost took out of the film this very small moment where Superman saves a squirrel from this like fight, because audiences hated it. They actually really didn't like it because audiences don't like squirrels, but it does this really great thing because squirrels are annoying, right? But it makes this wonderful point where it's like, he is so good that he's going to save something that you don't like, that you don't validate as being worth saving. And so, like, I felt it when I was watching. I knew that ahead of time, and I was like, I wonder where the squirrel thing is going to be. And then it's like, he's going to destroy the city, and he saves this stupid squirrel, and it's like, the movie got me. Now I'm making judgments on what deserves to live, what has value, what doesn't, and it is, it's one of the things that Superman as a character in that movie is struggling with and trying to save everybody and all that. I'm just like, dude, let this, who cares, greater good, blah blah blah. But it's like, no, that's the point that the film is making. So I got wrapped up in that. And again, if you listen to the audiences, if it was over, executive-ized, then maybe that doesn't make it, and it doesn't make that nice little point.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think that I like the idea that what is feared is the unconscious, like this interruption of the unconscious. I think that's true. And I think that but you're right, Jason, on the other hand, there is something, they're missing out on profit, right? Like there's something that when you're just giving what people have had, then they're going to be less enthusiastic for it. So I think in their mind, the danger outweighs the profit, really. I think that the danger of, I think all art is a danger to capital, and so I think that they don't think about this, obviously, but I think most capitalists realize that. So what do? They create an art market. They have these huge conglomerates own studios. They make reading into a non-entity in our society. Like, there are all these ways in which the threat of art is controlled or dissipated. And so they're not, obviously no one's planning this massive thing, but it's what happens.
Yeah.
So I just think this is another instance of the way in which that threat is contained and attempt to be turned into profit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, unfortunately, we should start wrapping up. I have a final closing question, like a quick one, right? Because we don't have much time, and thank you so much for spending an hour with us. I've tried reading this guy, but it doesn't make any sense. Can you explain all of Hegel to me? We got maybe about 2 minutes, if you could just... No, actually, the actual final question, all jokes aside, I have actually taken for plugs, I've taken Todd's Hegel course 4 times now, and I think I almost got it. It's starting to make sense. I think 4 more times. But my actual final question, Ryan and Todd, what is your favorite Gnostic movie, however you define that, right? You're the Matrixes, the Trial, what have you?
I think so. You're not going to like this answer because
this is like a mini version of that.
You gave it to me, but I think so. It's because you're not going to like it because it's my least favorite Orson Welles film of all 10. But I think his Trial, it's a really good, and I think I don't like the Gnostic dimension, but I think it really is a Gnostic film, and I think it really is an anti-Kafka film because it's
interesting. Because it's a Gnostic film.
Yeah. But I think it really is radically Gnostic, unlike the rest of Wells's work, which I think is Hegelian. So we could have that debate.
No, that's really interesting. It's really funny. Tough to top the 2 things that you suggested, which is the Matrix or the Trial. So I'm gonna zag slightly and say the much less talked about Animatrix that Shinichiro Watanabe did, which is the only other Matrix thing worth watching.
Yes.
He's the guy that did Cowboy Bebop, which is incredible, of course. Which no, it's not really Gnostic, but anyway, Animatrix, well worth watching. I think I'll put that in there. It's the only thing that genuinely expands that world, and I think the only thing you could argue that even expands the Gnostic dimension, because the second film there's too much with the creator and the repetition of the Neos, and then in the third film there's not enough of anything valuable, and then in the fourth film it shouldn't have been made. But so the fifth one I'm looking forward to, because it's not involved with. It's going to be made with nobody who was involved, I think, in the last two. So yeah, I'm going to go with Animatrix. But if I was going to be kind to No, we'll just leave it there. I was gonna try to make it work in my head. Do you know the Wachowskis' film, The Jupiter Ascending? This is not a good movie, but
I haven't seen it.
You've seen it, Jason?
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's wonderfully terrible. Like
Yeah. No, it's really amazing that they got Terry Gilliam to do a cameo in a part of the film that is all about a direct reference to Brazil, which maybe would also qualify.
Brazil would be
here.
interesting. One.
Brazil is really good. I might have that vaulted above. Like the idea, I do think it is interesting. I mean, the great idea of Brazil, right, is that like the idea of somebody getting something done without the authority involved is quite amazing. That could destroy someone's life and upend the entire world should something like that be rampant. Is quite good. So
that's one we need to cover, Jason, because I love that film so much. Okay, we'll end with plugs. I guess obviously the plug is check out Why Theory. But Todd, how many books have you written this week? Is there anything else you need to plug? Or
actually, I think I do have a book coming out in 2 days. So
oh wow,
yeah.
What book is that?
Well, we could talk to you anytime, and you could say that. So
right,
but yeah,
that's funny. No, it's called the Cambridge Companion to, or Cambridge Introduction to Jacques Lacan. I think.
Oh, cool.
So,
that's 2 days from now. That's
2
awesome.
days from now. Yeah.
Okay, very cool.
That's great.
We'll link it up with everything else. Ryan, you got anything to plug?
You know what? Slightly. I'll be done with revisions on my book this month, and then I will be in the process of the boring things. Getting, it has to get sent out for copy edits, and then you got to figure out what the cover is, and then you have to index the copy, all that kind of stuff. So I think if everything is super cool, maybe I can't imagine it would be out by the end of the year. So maybe early next year would be when it's coming out. But I get people ask me about it all the time because they're lovely. So the book is on the 1 yard line as far as my creation part is concerned, and so then it'll be negotiating, permissions and production and all that stuff from here on out. So yeah,
it's incredibly exciting though. Yeah.
Thank you.
So Jason, what's the lesson for today's episode?
I think what's some good ways to think here. Submit yourself to the texts around you. Be critical of not just the content but the medium that you're seeing it in. Yeah, normally we don't do these wrap up lesson things, but I think also I should also just say frankly, listen to Why Theory. That's another lesson for today's episode.
That's very nice.
Oh, that's very nice.
Perfect.
And here's John, one other quick thing here. I'm enjoying this conversation so much. I hope you guys are too. I think I'm going to put it out here. Can I offer a cliffhanger for the next time the four of us chat on Talk Gnosis?
Sure.
You heard it here first. It's an oral contract.
Yeah, exactly.
We have proof, everybody. They agreed.
Is the emergence of either a theoretical application to a text, or in like some for John and I say a Gnostic application to a text, whether or not it was intended by the creators.
Okay.
So this emergent quality.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Nice.
I think that'd be incredible.
Good.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So that's don't mention anything now. Hold it in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
Okay. Over
Thanks
and
so
out.
much.
Bye.
Bye.